Hi.
Hello.
Hello there. Hi,
Hello.
Jason.
Hi, yes, so it's Jayson
Oh,
Gylen.
hang on. Hang
You
on.
haven't got the
Hello.
Yeah,
video
hang on.
yet. It's
Yeah,
a
sorry about that. Yeah. Hi. Hello, both.
yeah, we got you two of us.
Hello.
I
Uh,
know. Sorry, the cliche books in the background. Sorry about that.
oh no, it looks
Oh,
the
that's
part.
fantastic.
How are you? Are you good?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Yourselves?
Yeah, doing well, doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah. The plan for the show's coming together okay, I take it.
Yeah, we had obviously the COVID thing knocked everything, but that's across the spectrum,
Yeah.
isn't it? But no, it's going well, and I think we're looking forward to actually having something physical to engage with, which we
Yeah,
haven't
yeah.
got so used to, are we?
Yeah.
That's knocked everybody for six, I think, in terms of kind of getting the chance to kind of share ideas and just that porosity about, what people do and how they do things, I think.
Mm.
I think there's just been very little chance for that. Everything's been like a bit like this, really. It's been very sort of close but distant, isn't it?
It
Yeah,
really is. Yeah. It really is. Quite strange, but you adapt, don't you? You adapt.
Yeah, I think you kind of find ways to kind of work in other in other contexts, or kind of you kind of prioritize kind of what you do or how you do things. So I think there are other ways that I think it's always a good challenge, because it gets you to really think about how you do things,
Mm.
as opposed to the idea, well, you can't do anything unless you've got this, that, and the other. And I think that versatility is really important. you know and that's the thing about drawing. I think drawing kind of has that. It can happen anywhere. It's probably the most democratic thing you could do in these undemocratic times.
Yeah, no excuses not to draw.
No, no, I don't think so. No, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. I'll do a little sort of introduction. So I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Jayson Gylen, and we have Jay Ottewell, and we're
Hello.
two of the co-curators for the Drawing Beyond Itself
Yeah.
exhibition that's going to be taking place in October at Air Gallery in Altrincham. And yeah, so we're obviously happy to have Greig Burgoyne here with us. Have I got that right? We were
Greg.
Greg rather than yeah. Okay.
Greg, right.
Yeah, so we're glad to have you with us. And a little bit of background on how these talks came about. Since we had that kind of unforeseen amount of time, leading up to the show now, which is in October, we thought we'd do a sort of series of Q&As so that we could dig behind some of the artist's work and, give a little bit of context leading up to the actual physical show. So that's how this came about. And then all this footage and information is going to be on the Northwest Drawing Collective website. So there's some information there for people about the show, which is connected to Air Gallery. So that's somewhere where people can have a look at this video and other resources as well. I'll introduce sort of a brief summary of your practice. Greig Burgoyne's practice engages in a broad-based, site-specific drawing practice that embraces film, live performance, installation, wall drawing, sound, and text, which is obviously quite a vast, interesting mix of things, but still centering around drawing. So yeah, we've got a sort of series of questions that I know that you've had a look at. And yeah, we're just sort of going to work through them, if that's okay with you. And
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Yeah, nice one. I think Jay's going to hit it off.
Brilliant. Just want to say thank you for doing this, Greg. Do appreciate it. So the first question I want to ask you is, how do you define drawing in your practice? What is the role of drawing centered around that? Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, I mean, it is drawing, but I think it's drawing which ultimately comes down to a relationship with how we navigate space. So how we navigate space, not necessarily provide any kind of definitions as such, but more kind of drawings are kind of very flexible, kind of expansive, contracting kind of situation. That's how I'd say it was. It's a kind of situation where you expand and contract in relation to space, body relations. So for me, it's often we talk about drawing as something that's a means to kind of contain things. Traditionally we'd contain the world by drawing. We'd take it into some sort of sphere where it's manageable. But for me, it's more about taking it head on, very much in in a public way. Not necessarily a gallery situation, but you know, and also the way that it's drawing that, yeah, it is about measurement, but there's also an element of wrestling with the absurd, I think, that comes into that. So I don't necessarily think it's about, you know, making marks. It could be about the way that we navigate a space. It could be the way that we make some kind of relationship with that space, you know, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's, you know, completely worked out. I tend to kind of not think of a drawing like that. I think drawing's very much I use the word situation because I think it's a situation that's very much a dialogue. It's not something where you're kind of, you know, that in a way, that's what I find quite dull about painting and things like that, where I came from previously, that it always seemed to start with a limit, whereas drawing, for me, doesn't have any limits. It's kind of, it doesn't have any preconceived kind of elements to it that say, you know, that's been defined already, yeah? So, you know, Anthony Howe, when he wrote the book on the anthology of performance, he said about the idea that performance is something that starts with nothing. As opposed to, you know, painters or filmmakers, they start with equipment. They start with certain kind of things that predetermine the activity, or, you know, what you mentioned later on about rituals, for instance. Whereas I think drawing doesn't necessarily have to begin with anything, you know, not even a cave wall. You know, I think it could just be, I think, you know, I think it's kind of much more open-ended than that. So it's hard, on one level, it's hard to define it and say it's this, but I think it's constituted by lots of different elements that are very public, very kind of everyday. But so it doesn't really come down to kind of, I mean, it's a conscious decision to not work with any traditional materials either. I kind of am more interested in materials that have already got a function, and it's kind of stretching or kind of recalibrating what that function or limit is, even for a material, you know. So yeah, I'll stop talking now.
No, yeah, that's
that was pretty good, thank you.
So yeah, so you mentioned measurements earlier,
Yeah.
and then obviously you've talked about this kind of this broad idea of drawing, but you also use strategies in your work. So yeah, do you mind explaining how that kind of, is that a way of that's a definition, you know, with strategies? Does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite a strong believer in the idea that play, you know, and curiosity are things that, you know, don't just apply to drawing, but they apply to any artist. You know, whatever stage they're at, you know, not just, you know, I'm not talking about students, talking about any period in time of our practice. And I think that's something that we forget, you know. So strategies, for me, they're quite ridiculous in some ways, because, you know, we don't, you know, if something's so democratic, why would you kind of have rules? But the rules that are actually kind of very entropic anyway. You know, they don't generate solutions. They don't make things more practical. They make things the opposite, I think. They unravel. But I think the rule-based strategies, I don't really know where they how they end up being the way they are, but they just do. And I kind of like that, because I have to be surprised, you know. So when I got my studio, I don't make the work. I just come up with these sort of plans, these sort of that'll end up being somewhere or other, depending on what the project is. So the rules are a way to kind of take that authority and control, obviously, out of my hands, because otherwise you're preempting what it's going to be, and then you might as well not do it then. And also there's something to try. In some ways, rules kind of intensify our behavior or habitual activities or gestures. So by doing that, something is going to kind of unravel in that process, you know. Either by intensifying it kind of breaks down, or intensifying it moves and shifts into something that's different, some kind of alternative, not necessarily a development, but an alternative. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be some kind of hierarchical kind of evolution in that means of drawing, where you kind of you create something beyond what it was. It's alternatives, I think. So it's not necessarily what's the word, vertical, that shift in that process, you know. I mean, that's partly one of the reasons why I think a lot of what happens kind of on the ground, or not necessarily on walls, because I think walls kind of, they impinge rather kind of what the way that we'll engage with the work, you know. So I quite like the idea it's not necessarily something that you view in that sort of rectangular square way. I like the idea that it kind of is in dialogue with the space that it's in. So on one level, you've got strategies that are about testing, or maybe colliding with the logic of the space that it's in anyway, which is a container, let's face it. But then I'm quite interested in the way that I mentioned about limits, that drawing through strategies, through rules, it makes it emancipatory for anybody to be involved in as well. So I quite like the way that the work can engage other people, not necessarily artists. So that it is performance, the work, but it doesn't mean that you're the one, it's all about you. I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested more in what the idea is and how it opens up in other ways to other people too. So yeah.
That's really interesting. You mentioned before about I just hope you don't mind me asking, the wrestling with the absurd, and how you don't necessarily start with like a sort of like a medium specific drawing based practice, but it is at the same time. So I was wondering, how does the process, is there a process led engagement how you make these works, or is it something based on the idea, then it develops later on, or does it happen straight away, or is it something that gradually happens? Because you said kind of want to move away and sort of have this dialogue with space and situations.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the studio, I go into my studio. I mean, one of the works that I'm showing in the show, I mean, is done in the studio. So the ball drawing piece, and you know, these things come out of, I kind of have an inventory of different materials that a lot of it comes from sort of stationery, pound shops. You know, I everywhere I go, I always like to find these cheap kind of shops that sell everything. And I buy stuff and I think, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I buy it because I think there's something about it that, you know, it clearly has a very ubiquitous use that everybody understands. But I'm thinking, well, what if it had something else? So it's partly kind of redirecting that functionality into something else. So when I'm in the studio, I don't really have a plan about what it's going to be for, or I actually just, as I said, just play. I go in there and I don't know what I'm going to do. And I start kind of playing with stuff, and sometimes it works. I mean, I could go the whole day and it'll be a complete shambles, nothing will work. And then it'll be about half an hour before I'm going or leaving the studio, and something will click, and that will be what's needed, you know. I mean, Philip Guston famously said that, you know, art was well, he was talking about painting, but he said that it was a long preparation for a few moments of innocence, which in hindsight is terribly romantic now, but and heroic, because painters like that kind of thing. But I think, you know, there is something about the way that you can't, and I think it took a bit of time to realize you can't force these things to happen. So, you know, they're very simple things that I come up with, but there is a lot, there is a lot of stuff that I think about and read about that informs that. So it's that thing where the knowledge will start to apply, or the whatever frameworks I've got that I'm interested in, that'll start to kind of become apparent or surface through that collision of the materials and the space, you know, just playing basically, you know. Yeah. And there aren't any winners or losers in the games, I don't think. If they're games, I think they are kind of games. There aren't any winners or losers, and I think that's really good. I don't like the idea that there's people don't win. I like the idea that nobody wins, but nobody loses either. You know, it's like failure, isn't it? I mean, failure kind of all. If you fail, does that mean it's successful, or is it, or do people therefore really fail? You know, so I'm kind of interested in those things as well. And also the element of you know, that thing of a long time doing something. I mean, I'm quite interested in spending a long time doing something that is completely pointless. and realizing that actually there's something in that, you know. But not for the point of view that just because you spend a long time on something, it'll make it really good either. Because I don't buy into that either. But there is something about, you know, some of the work I've done where, yeah, it's quite a lot of physical graft, but I quite like that element as well. It feels it makes it useful, even although it's not benefiting anybody in particular at all. You know, I think there's something interesting about that. You know, yeah. You know, I dug up a beach in Edinburgh a couple of years ago, and I spent all day moving the sand. I mean, it has got overtones, obviously, of Francis Elise, but you know, his is way more political than what I was doing. I was just wanting to see what happened by moving a load of space to see, and end up losing it because you couldn't tell the difference between the sand that was being moved and the sand that was on the beach. So it was quite pathetic, you know. But I'd kind of like that because I think we are a bit like that anyway. We are a bit kind of, you know, when we kind of like to present this sort of amazing idea that we're really clever and we're really whatever, and we're actually kind of not really that clever at all. We're all a bit pathetic, really. So I quite like that idea that we embrace that, you know. So drawing is a kind of haven. I mean, Maurice Blanchot, he said that the public space, and I think galleries are a bit like that as well, increasingly more and more. You know, he said that it was a house of anarchy, you know. That's what he talked about when he said it was the public space. And I thought, well, kind of drawing has kind of really got that position right now. You know, it doesn't have any baggage. It's got this amazing position to be this kind of anarchic, mischievous setting for liberation of some shape or form, you know. So yeah.
That's it's a little bit that idea of the myth of Sisyphus with the idea of you shifting sand. It kind of has a sort of visual parallel. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned painting briefly, that you've got a MA degree in painting from the Royal College of Art. But you kind of you seem to talk about it like it was maybe a bit more restrictive, or it's, you know, the idea of the history of painting is obviously very loaded. So I was just wondering, sort of, did the course encourage you towards this idea of a kind of drawing-based practice because it was a wider umbrella term that could give you more kind of freedom, perhaps, or what did you learn from your time on the course, and how did it shape you as an artist?
I think being on the MA, I mean, I think I mean, hindsight's a great thing, but at the time I was just trying to kind of be a painter that I suppose fitted in with this terribly egotistical environment, which was actually quite challenging. I didn't really like that at all. It wasn't very comfortable, that. And in a way, it kind of, I suppose it started to kind of create a kind of conversation in my own head that you know, this was, I don't know if I really want to paint. You know, I just thought I'd always done it, and I think I felt, well, that's what I have to do. And then I think it was a kind of eureka kind of thing over a period of time from being on the course and after it, that I thought, do you know what, I find this really boring. You know, I find this really boring, this whole thing of painting. Now, I'm not saying painting isn't boring, because there's a lot of really interesting painting out there. And a lot of it really informs my work as well, funny enough. But I just got really bored with painting. I thought, I just don't, I can't do this. It felt like an act or something, you know, like you get the paints, you get the canvas, and then you go like this, and then you do it, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. I thought, that's ridiculous, you know. I just don't know how people can do it. I really don't. I don't know how they can keep doing that every day of their life. And they do. Painters and all that, everybody else, they're obsessed about it. You know, they've got to paint. But then I think of Paul McCarthy's painter, and I think that really is it. You know, that's actually better. If paint was like that, it'd be all right, but it isn't. It's kind of way more sophisticated, I think. So, but I think, you know, there's, you know, I kind of was with some amazing painters, but I just thought, it wasn't directed off. It felt like a performance in all the wrong ways. Whereas I think expanded painting, like you know, maybe a relationship with drawing, I think there's something more exciting in that when it loses that frame, you know, where it actually has a kind of like you think of Richard Tuttle, you know, and people like that, and Sarah G and so on. You can sort of see there's something, they're wrestling with something there that's kind of a bit more stimulating because it's less predictable. You know, it doesn't have that. And I think it's difficult because painting has a history, and that history kind of creates a lot of difficulty if you're trying to move it forward. Whereas I think in drawing, it's such an open field. It's I don't think it has that. I don't think it has those drawbacks or hindrances or baggage in the same way at all, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because I've always felt that drawing is this very open-ended kind of medium. You can, you know, sort of use any medium to sort of create but a drawing in any way, and it voices a lot of different individual opinions and ideas, either in art or in the world. But I was going to ask you, Greg, as well, that obviously in relation to the show, it's an expanded drawing show, and you mentioned in relation to expanded painting. I do understand how sometimes painting is quite, you know, meticulous, or some people like it, some people don't. But I wanted to ask you, how does performance relate to that in your work? How does that come about? Do you see a performance as expanded drawing, or do you see it as a performance and then the drawings come before? How does that work for you in terms of expanded drawing?
I think it depends on the work itself. You know, I mean, I don't do it because I want people to watch me. I mean, it's just the way that I've found to make the work. It involves me doing something with materials, whether it's indoors or in some other setting, you know. But it's not so much. I mean, I'm just facilitating the rules or the strategies. I mean, I don't know if other people could do that. I suppose they could, but I haven't really thought about that yet. But I like the idea of physically doing something, as opposed to providing objects to look at. So, you know, in one sense, it's a tricky one. I mean, on one level, the film or that's a kind of record of the work, but I think but ultimately, you know, and so the object or whatever it is, or whatever the strata is that it's happened on or through or with, I suppose that's the kind of residue of it. So I think in a way, you know, I think the drawing is kind of at the beginning and in the middle and at the end, but in different roles. You know, I think it has a different. It's in a different state, I suppose. I think, you know, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. I think from my point of view, I see it's kind of, if you watch it, that's the drawing too. But if you look at the end product, which I don't really feel like that's what it is either, that's an element that's embodied whatever happened previously to it. You know, I was in this show in the Lowry last year in Manchester, and it was all about chance processes in art. And it's called Expect the Unexpected, and I did this performance for the show, and I kind of walked through all this tape, and they just left it in the gallery. So you had this kind of all this sort of crap in a way lying around everywhere, and I thought, well, yeah, that's the drawing, but you know, you kind of see the film, and then you kind of, it puts you in the middle of the kind of the activity that was manifest, i.e. the stuff that's left, and then the thing that brought it about, that being like that. So I think it kind of puts the viewer into the middle of it. So they kind of, they wrestle with it, I suppose, themselves. And I quite like that idea that there's an active role there. You know, I mean, you know, it's you know, in a way they perhaps complete the work themselves. You know, they make the work themselves, not in a kind of Roland Barthes type of way, I think, but in the sense that they take these ingredients and they put them together as they see them, as opposed to ramming it down somebody's throat. This is how it's going to be, or this is what it means. You know, I don't think anybody likes that. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and it always feels like these things go so quickly. But maybe for a final question, what artists do you think have had the strongest influence on your practice? Just generally, don't have to be artists that work in drawing.
Okay. I don't know if, okay, I mean, it's quite interesting, but Giotto, I've got a big thing about Giotto. I think the way that he works with gesture and space has fascinated me for a long time. And I think, but it was only really the last few years when I've actually seen them in the flesh that I've really kind of I thought there's something in this about, and that's painting, of course, but but there's something quite extraordinary about that. And I think there's this sort of metaphysical element when you see that work. And it's not really art. I mean, it's kind of more than that. But I just find that work really fascinating because of the way that, like Fra Angelico as well, the way that they create this sort of dialogue with space, and it's very moving as well. But then saying that, people like that's a funny one. This it's quite odd, but I mean, the artists that kind of really inform the work, I don't think they're, I mean, the people like Akonshi, they're kind of a certain, Smithson I've got a lot of time for. I think he was incredibly intelligent, very well read, but also there's a real integrity, I think, in the work that I find really admirable. So Smithson would be one, but people like Paul McCarthy interest me, but actually, a lot, if I'm honest, a lot of things that inform the work are literary writing about space. So people like Calvino, Maurice Blanchot, I've got a lot of time for. I mean, he writes a lot of amazing things that are, they're not really stories. They have no beginner end at all. They're just ridiculous. But that's what's so interesting about them. So he'll write a whole book about waiting for something. I mean, it's terribly French, but I kind of like that, and I get a lot of ideas from that type of writing, and also, people like Derrida, Merleau-Ponty is a big figure in the work for obvious reasons about what he talks about habit, about performing gestures, about the way that we don't look at the world. The world's all around us. So it's kind of odd. I mean, between Giotto and Smithson, it's kind of very much theoretical things, which I don't read from the point of view that I understand every single thing they're going on about, but I see ideas in there that I think, I want to do something like that. Like Merleau-Ponty, he said that, the kind of the foundation of meaning wasn't in the heaven of ideas or in the solidity of meaning, rather. It wasn't in the heaven of ideas or the foundation of meaning. It was actually at its joints, near above or below appearances, but at its joints. Now that kind of thing really interested me, because I think, well, yeah, and how do you take that thing as something that you see and something you think about? How do you bring that together, and how do you play with that? So that's really kind of the things that I'd say are catalysts for the work. That I kind of want to wrestle with those things that I think, well, what could that mean? And Bernard Tschumi said that, is space something that has limits? And if it doesn't, does it just go on and on forever? And it's a bit like the Calvino story about where's the center of a place? Or where does it begin or where does it end? How do you know you're in the center of a city? Or how do you know when the city starts? Things like that really fascinate me, So I those are probably things that direct the work in some way. I mean, I like what you said about Sisyphus, because that ball that's in the show, I mean, what I'll do is I'll send you the ball, because it would make sense. It's in the show, and it's a kind of pathetic looking thing, but there's something about the fact that it's kind of been kind of handled like that, and yet it escaped. It got away, I kind of like that. It managed to get away from this nutcase hitting it with a marker pen, So yeah. Anyway, but I think that's kind of things that I suppose would inform the work or kind of engage me, I think.
Very eclectic mix of interests and influences, but I guess that's quite often the case, isn't it, with artists? Sadly,
we're healthy.
So sadly we've run out of time, so we're going to have to sort of wrap it up. Okay. But we'd love to. It would be great we could speak for another hour quite easily. Let's. I guess we're just really, really excited that we've got your work in the show to film.
No, I'm really honoured you kind of asked me to be in it. I mean, I'm delighted you kind of like the work and you want to show some pieces. I mean, but yeah, it'd be good. It would be good to talk again. I mean, I've obviously looked at your work as well. Like, I'd be really interested to hear more about it from Manchester, where you were studying, Jayson.
Yeah,
and things there that'd be good to know about. And same with Jay.
We should.
I think. I mean, I meant to be in a solo show at the Lowry next year, but I think it will move to the following year. But I know I'll be up for some recce's, so when I am, maybe we can meet. It'd be nice to meet in the flesh and talk a bit more about these things.
Sure, yeah. I think
that would be fantastic. And if you could send us that ball, that'd be amazing.
I mean, maybe what you could do is drop us an email about where you want me to send it to, and I'd go from there. I mean, I'd put it back, but I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be a great addition. Well, thank you for your time. And we'd love
very
to,
much.
At some point pick up the conversation again, because that's part of what we're trying to do is, give it that kind of, that aspect of an open dialogue sort of thing. So, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Bob. Really good to meet you, and good luck with the prep for getting the thing all up and ready.
Yeah, we're excited. Very good.
All right. Bye.
It'll be good.
Yep.
Thank you.